Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar on medical device software development and applications. Today's webinar will be led by Richard Young, who is trainer for the MDTI courses on practical guidance for medical device audits and inspections and managing the transition to the new IVD regulation. Richard will be speaking for about 20 to 30 minutes today. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end of his presentation. Please submit them in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen as they occur to you, and we'll read them out at the end. I'll now hand over to Richard.
Hello everybody, welcome to this webinar where we'll be exploring medical device software. We'll be very much concentrating today on the regulator's view of software, specifically implementation of that software within medical devices. Obviously, the field of medical device software can go into a whole load of different areas, from manufacturing through to a whole load of application areas, but we'll just try and cover a bit of it today to give you a taste of the sorts of controls and elements that the regulators are looking for in the development of software. As Ryson said, if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask them and we'll try and answer them at the end of the presentation. As I said, my name is Richard Young. I work through MDTI as a trainer. I also work with Acclaimed Biomedical Consulting here in the UK. Our details can be found on the website there. So please feel free to contact us if you have any questions after the webinar. Really the opening question we want to start with here is who mandates this software validation thing? Other questions we're going to try and answer this is the control of the off-the-shelf software in the development environment, and really trying to give you the beginnings of a pathway to address how to develop software from the beginning so it meets the regulations at the end of the day. So to address the first question here, we need to think, who mandates this software validation stuff? And we've all seen over the last few decades explosion in the level of software or the availability of technological devices that are out there, in our pockets, in our mobile phones, and every aspect of our lives. Medical technology is no different. We've seen it getting into every area of what we're doing, and that's recognised by regulators such as the FDA and the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, which is the gathering of FDA and the Australian TGA, the European Commission, a whole load of other people together to look at global issues within our industry sector. So everybody's very interested in this. We'll look at some of the regulations and standards around this. We're going to specifically look at the changes as we go through today relating to the proposed text of the European Medical Device Regulations, which should start coming into force. Well, actually should have come into force last week, but that seemed to be a bit late. So sometime in the near future is the best I can do on that one. So that's who mandates things. So we've got software all around us. So we've got mobile phones that are getting increasingly complex and have a lot of content on them. And I increasingly see content coming into mobile phones of a medical nature to monitor, alleviate, and even in some cases purport to prescribe. Interestingly, there were some articles that were circulating on the internet in the last few weeks that the Apple have actually said that they won't actually take medical device applications into the Apple Store anymore unless it's been demonstrated that they've gone through adequate regulatory scrutiny. So there's an increased focus on this area and need to be doing it properly if you're going to be successful. So we've got the software all around us. We all know, we've all had our PC or laptop freezes on us at an inopportune moment. My last one was a Windows 10 update right before I did a webinar last week. We hear terms like the Internet of Everything, and we carry a lot of technology around with us. We hear about wearables that can monitor our health status, heart rate, blood pressure, artificial pancreases that can be monitoring our glucose levels and administering insulin continuously to maintain the homeostasis within the body. All of these things are very software driven, so there's a lot of things we need to think about here, and a huge range of risk profiles of software that are out there, and how, because of the different impacts these products may have on us. So there's a lot of things to be thinking about here. So as I mentioned, Apple have recognized the issue and have issued new guidance in their standard terms and conditions. There's a link at the bottom of that page which will take you to Apple's requirements for putting applications into their online store. And I really fully expect other providers of these sort of shopping environments to have a very similar approach over the next little while. The FDA are probably ahead of everybody else in really defining how to deal and work with software in medical devices, and they have a bit of guidance out there on the internet. The links there for you. I'd highly recommend you go and look at that. It is free for use, and actually is an excellent summary of what you should be doing during the development process for medical devices. And they've had that out there for quite some time. Everybody else is sort of catching up at the moment. But I think the phrase, the quote here is worth focusing on and understanding. So that software shall be developed and manufactured according to the state of the art, taking into account the principles of development, life cycle, risk management, including information security, verification and validation. Now, I'm a regulatory and quality consultant. I do a lot of training. I deal a lot with companies who are developing elements of software to either be included in or support the function of their medical devices or in vitro diagnostic products. And the problem I see is people don't read that statement. State of the art is very, very important, but the development life cycle is at the heart of what we need to hear. And the best expression, I think, or makes my heart sink when I come into a new potential client, is it's very, very important to get the environment and the elements of your software development established before you start writing software. And if there's one thing you take away from this today to help you on your way, is define, get control before you start writing software. It's too late to try and retrospectively apply these controls and disciplines after the code's been written. Not always possible, I know. There's a lot of legacy code out there, and there's ways of dealing with that we will discuss in the full course, but if you're starting from scratch, that's what you should be thinking about. So, as I mentioned earlier, the European Union have got a new medical device regulation out there. It's not published as yet. The agreed text is out there. There's probably going to be a bit of legal tidying up on it, but the content's pretty well agreed, so we know pretty well where we are now. But interestingly, there was very little mention of software previously in the medical devices directives. Under the new regulation, there's a recognition that there's a lot, software is a major part of medical devices these days. I'm not going to read these to you, but I'm really going to encourage you to go and look at the essential requirements specifically associated with software and software development. But I picked out a couple of key points here. So we're looking at software where a single fault condition in that software could lead to an impairment of performance or consequent risks or impairment of performance of the device. The specific emphasis here on information security or cyber security of the product and making sure that data and software function are maintained in a safe environment. And you'll notice in section 14.3, there's a specific mention here about these products being used on mobile devices, phones, tablet computers, and so on. And considering things like size and size of the screen, contrast ratios, and things like that, basically environmental factors that that need to be done there. So you can see here that 14.3a, manufacturers shall describe minimal requirements on hardware, IT networks, and characteristics of IT security measures, users, and so on. So yeah, you can see there's a lot more focus coming into those at the moment. And that consideration of mobile devices and their uses is very, very important. And over all of this, it is always also worth remembering in the back of your head, it's not specifically the core of software development, but if you're developing a software-driven product, there's usually a user interface. And it's very important that that user interface meets the requirements of usability. You demonstrate usability engineering for that user interface as well. So keep that in mind as we go through there. We're not going to specifically dwell on it, but for those of you who want to look at IEC 62366, defines some of the requirements there. Usability is an overarching thing in the new regulation, so don't let that one go away from you. So today what I want to do is concentrate on looking at IEC 62304 as a template of a standard for the development of software for inclusion in medical devices. Broadly accepted as, you know, it's about software lifecycle processes. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it's an awfully good starting point. And it aligns very closely with the FDA requirements that I mentioned previously. So basically, if you hit the requirements and create the documentation that you've got here on this slide, you're going to be pretty good for your regulatory submissions coming forward. So let's quickly run through them here. First thing on the list, we're going to have software development planning. So we've got to know what we're building and how we're going to build it. We're going to have some requirements, and quite probably very centrally, we have to have some sort of architecture. How is the software going together? What are the elements or the functional modules that are going to be in there? From that, we need a detailed design, and then we have to have human implementation and verification of the function of those units. Integration testing of the software into the system, and then finally software release. I mean, that all makes very good sense. What are the other things we're going to be looking for around here? We need to have a process to maintain software, because despite our best efforts, we can almost guarantee we're going to find bugs in the product when those nasty users get in there and start using the product. They'll use it in ways we didn't possibly predict, so we've got to be reactive to that. So we need a maintenance plan. We need to have a risk management process, and we need to build risk control measures into the design of the software as we go through the whole build going forward. Risk management as an overall here, as a central process, is impossible to apply after you've already built the software. It's a design input. It will dictate elements of your software architecture and your module structure. So make sure risk management is part of your product planning process. Depending on the complexity and the risk profile of your device, you're going to have some level of software configuration management, so you can keep track of the build levels and the releases of the software to your users. And if you've got all that, you're doing pretty well at this at this time. So you're creating a lot of documents at this point to demonstrate to demonstrate to the regulatory auditor that you have these processes in place, that they're functioning, and that they're creating an environment of control that helps you develop the product going forwards. So IEC 62304 has classifications, and I think it's really worth keeping these in mind. So Class A is your low-level things where no injury, damage, or to health is possible. So this is your really low-level software. It might be an application that just monitors and tells you about your heartbeat or something like that, something very, very low level. You've got a Class B, and then at the other end you've got Class C, where death or serious injury could occur from malfunction of the product or the software associated with the product. So that's your top end, where the control is the most critical. And I've gone through that because you keep in mind that your solutions and your application, your diligence of the application should be proportional to how serious the risk of failure, single point failure with your product is. So always keep those in mind. So what documentation, this is very closely aligned with the FDA requirements, by the way. So what sort of, we've talked about documents, what are they going to look like? We want to document a software development plan, and we wanted to, very importantly, document the development environment. Now, what do I mean by the development environment? By the development environment, I want to know, as a regulator, as an auditor, what tools you're going to need to develop the software. So I want to know which compiler you're going to use, which software, what coding language you're going to use, what compiler you're going to use with it, possibly the configuration of that compiler, the libraries that you're going to use as source to help build your software, and if you're going to be using any test harnesses, static or dynamic test units to challenge the software during the development and validation process, I want to know about those as well. So it's important to document those and keep them consistent, and importantly have a change management process to update that list, that golden list, that description of your working environment as required. The kiss of death to your development environment will be a software developer who finds a new cool library that they've heard about that does some really great things and starts using it in your development environment without letting you know. So you're going to know these things, so there's an element of control there. So we want a software requirement specification, SRS, software architecture, could be some sort of drawing of how the modules go together, a software design specification, a maintenance plan, and a problem resolution process, which is a good idea to get up front. How are we going to handle bugs and problems with the software as we go forward? How are we going to iterate those issues out? Other things to consider. Use of software of unknown provenance. If you've got an established medical device, you might have elements or items of code or units that you want to reuse, which aren't as well documented as you would actually like, either internally or externally sourced, in which case deal with those, have them documented, plan how you're going to demonstrate they function correctly. We've mentioned development tool chains and libraries already, so have these all listed out and ready to go and documented fully under change control. So your change management system is very important here. So you'll see that those marry on very well with the main clauses of the FDA software validation guidance. So that guidance is very much aimed at requirements definition. There's a lot of commonality there. Defect prevention. So they're interested in the testing and code coverage you get, how you challenge the software before you release it out into the wild. They want you to consider the entire life cycle of the software. So if you are planning to have your software installed on a mobile environment during that software's life cycle, how are you going to deal with updates to the operating system, other things that may be also running in that environment? You need to consider that. We need some plans. We need some procedures that give the control over this whole process. We need a change management process. We need to know how much of the code is going to be covered by validation, sometimes as close to 100% as we can. And they're very, very keen on an idea of independence of review. So get somebody else in to look over your implementation at the end of the process, just to give it a kick the tires and make sure everything's pretty solid. That would be something I would review. I would reserve for a higher class software development, but can be very valuable and well worth keeping in mind. Lifecycle activities. Your control of the product throughout its life cycle needs to be commensurate with risk. You can go overboard with these things for very low risk products and end up burning a lot of resources and time needlessly. Be proportional. Reserve the nth degree of control for the high risk products. Make sure that you consider the intended use in the user environment during the development of your software. I personally find it very useful to use ISO 14971, the risk management standard, as a way of defining environmental considerations and documenting those as part of the software planning process. So many ways of doing it, but yeah, the nub of that is ensure you understand the intended use and the user environment. Where is this going to be used? What could be happening? Could they be running a microwave oven? Your Wi-Fi connection to the cloud, whatever it is. Home environments are especially challenging, is what I'm trying to say there. But be aware of it, be cognizant, work with it. As you begin to risk analyze the process, especially for those devices where software is a controlling element of a bigger medical device, be cautious about mitigating system risks in software, using software as a control and risk mitigation tool, if only because if that isn't controlled in a very, very careful manner, those controls can sometimes lead to unintended consequences by limitations of service or other unintended effects that knock on to the overall safety and performance of the device. So just mitigating everything in software isn't always the answer, is what I'm saying here. So having discussed all that, we end up with software development life cycle that's fairly straightforward like this. So we start at the top with our analysis of requirements. When we clearly understand what we're doing in the user environment and what we're trying to make, we do some design. When we get finished designing, we actually start implementing something. That's where we start actually doing the coding. We test, and then we get into a maintenance cycle of understanding when things have gone wrong, analysing the requirements to fix it, redesign and implementation and subsequent regression testing and so on. And thus the circle of software development carries on. I've already mentioned ISO 14971 Annex C, so that has some specific questions relevant to software. So what is the intended use and how is the medical device to be used, as we've already mentioned. Is the medical device intended to be implanted? Is the medical device intended to be in contact with the patient or other persons? And what other components and materials are in contact or used with the medical device? So that gets your intended use and your environment sorted out there. If you move on, we get into the specific things relating to the software. And I've just pulled out those sections from the standard for you. I'm not going to read them at you, but you can see there's some thought being given to various possible issues that can result from software. So, for example, does the device have a control interface? Does it display information such as settings or readings or measurements of some sort? Is it controlled by menu? Does it use an alarm system? And so on and so on and so on. So you can see here that somebody's put a lot of thought in here to try and frame a series of questions that help crystallize your ideas around the design of the software and some of the features that might feature in it. lot of work to be done there. We've covered an awful lot of ground in a little over 25 minutes. I hope you found that interesting. Obviously, there's a lot more to be discussed around this issue, and many days can be spent discussing specific applications and elements of projects, but that's as much as we're doing in the webinar today. But I hope you found that a real interesting introduction to the regulators or the auditor's perspective of software and what we expect to see as far as software development and control is concerned. So I'll say thank you at that point, and we can go back to Oysen to see if there are any questions arising from that.
Thanks, Richard. We do have some questions coming in. The first one is, what skills does a product safety engineer need to have in order to assess the software against the standard?
Oh, that's a very good question. From my perspective, I think anybody involved in the risk management, I think you need a whole variety of viewpoints. There is no one skill set that I can think of that really stands out. I find risk management is most effective when it's conducted as a team sport. So typically, depending on the environment it's going into, I would involve healthcare professionals who are going to be working in the area. Yeah, if you're developing something for, let's say, for example, for home use by a specific patient group, I try and get patients involved. I typically would invite a patient to be involved in the planning and assessment of the risk of the product. So they'll often come up with things you never thought of. Problems they've had with the product they're using today that aren't reported anywhere and so on. So they're invaluable. I think you need some engineers, and you also need somebody who understands the framework you're working with and integrate all those viewpoints together and bring it into a coherent whole that the designer can pick up and actually work with. So I think you need a lot of skills there. So that's a bit of a woolly question, but no one set of skills comes to mind there, to be perfectly honest.
Thanks, Richard.
Any more?
Yes. How do you deal with existing EU Class 1 and Class 2A products that have been on the market for a long time and for which the software was developed prior to the IEC 62304, 2006? What documentation, etc., is required to be updated, created retrospectively?
Up until now, my answer would have been that, as long as it hasn't undergone significant alteration, has been proven to be working reliably, not a huge amount of change. I would say, though, however, that there's no grandfathering clause will be associated with the new medical devices regulations. So over the transition period, which looks to be approximately 3 years in total, I think manufacturers are going to have to go back to their products and really redocument those elements of software against Essential Requirement 14 that we looked at earlier. So there's going to have to be an element of going back and looking again. Two approaches, I think, work for that. The least painful is to an approach that colleagues I've worked with in the past called black boxing, where really put the bit of software that you're using in a black box, say what you're putting in, say what you expect to get out. Don't worry too much about what goes on inside the box, because you're not going to touch it. You don't, you monitor the inputs and outputs and admit that you don't know how the code's structured inside. The downside of that is it's very difficult to maintain and takes a lot of work. And if you have to open the box to fix a problem with that black box you've created, that element of software, if it's poorly documented, you're usually into the second option, which is rewriting that code to be used again. Painful and expensive, granted, but often easier to maintain going forwards. So again, no definitive answer. I think you've got to take a very pragmatic approach and look at it very carefully. And the trigger point is where the maintenance activities or the regulatory input, your engineering ability to maintain the product is compromised by that software. That's the point you need to sort of, right, we need to go and look at this again and possibly start from scratch depending on the level of documentation you've got.
When's our next
webinar? Thanks, Richard. Is there a specific essential requirement on usability in the proposal of regulation?
There isn't. Usability comes into the new ISO 13485, the 2016 version, where the use of usability engineering is mandatory. It is already a mandatory requirement in the FDA. Because FDA have guidance on usability engineering. If you don't have usability engineering as a report within a 510K or PMA, the FDA will refuse to process your application. And yes, there's specific mention of usability within the essential requirements, but as I'm running the presentation, I haven't memorized all the essential requirements yet, because there's a lot more of them than there used to be. There's 19 when there used to be 13. But yes, usability is an essential requirement of devices in the new accepted text of the European regulations.
Great, thanks very much, Richard. I think we've answered all the questions now, so we may leave the webinar there. Thank you very much to you, Richard, and to everyone who's attended today.
My pleasure. Pleasure talking to you all.
Thank you. Goodbye.